Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Armchair Gaming. I am your host, the Unbearable Gamer, and today we're gonna be switching gears a little bit. In most previous episodes, we've discussed philosophical concepts as they are presented and explored in video games, and in this episode, we're gonna let that take a back seat, and instead we're going to take a look at art, the philosophy of art, aesthetics, and where video games fall into that mix. And you're probably saying to yourself, Sheldon, why the hell are we playing Call of Duty World War II if we're going to talk about art? I stand firmly in the position that video games are in fact an art form. When they made the transition from I guess kitsch medium type to true art form, I suppose is up for debate. But I would argue that at this day and age, nobody can really argue the position of video games as an art medium. Anybody who can, I suspect, probably 95 and dying, or just cranky, bitter, and not good with a controller in their hands. But on that note, we'll get started, and I'm hoping we'll go through a little bit of the Socratic method as we try to establish a definition of art, and that's going to be the key focus of today's episode, is trying to grapple what art is. And that's a hard question to ask, obviously, which is why we're going to grapple with it and not actually answer it. Because if I had the answer to that, then I'd probably be working at the NAC or any other major art gallery, making big money, telling a bunch of whippersnappers and whatnot what art really is. But as we're playing Call of Duty and we're exploring this game and we're playing some PvP, and it's gonna be terrible. You're gonna be able to laugh at me like nothing else. You're gonna be like, "Oh, Sheldon, really? Why do you do that, man? Why are you perching up in front of another sniper?"
We have fire superiority.
Kind of why I like games with friendly fire on, so I can just like shoot a guy in the butt. Always a good sniper. Anyways, so like I said, I want to talk about what the definition of art is, and we're gonna play around with multiple definitions. We're gonna try to grasp a concept. Like I said, I want to do... Ooh, I got a straight snipe there. Art... I'm going back to my university days here. Pretty terribly, I might add. Ooh. And in philosophy of art class, one of the things we talked about at length is the barrier between art and not art. And when you're discussing art, you know, people will throw definitions like art is anything that's concrete, intangible, and elicits an emotional response, which it doesn't work. It's not all art elicits an emotional response to everybody, so you can't really rely on that definition. And then some people will say, you know, an emotional response is dependent on a specific form of actions, and since no emotional response is ubiquitous and no two people have, pardon me, the same emotional response to a subject, you can't have that be the definition. And then from there you might try to argue that art is anything that is something that imitates reality. It's a reflection therein. And then you have to start breaking down how one reflects nature and the like. And what it is to reflect nature, because if you use that definition, then cubism flies right out the window for anything but the most abstract definitions of reflection of reality. And that's an important distinction to make, obviously, because I don't think there's anybody who would argue that the cubist movement or the surreal movement or the hard abstract movement, oops, I exploded. I don't think anybody who would argue against those being actual expressions of art as a medium. So we can pick apart the definition of art through and through, and it's probably important that we do just that. Oops, I missed. Oh, he's good. I'm undercover now. I'm real bad. I'm gonna switch to the M1 Garand after this, so that I don't screw up for my team any more than I have been. Here we go. Ooh, speed of the devil. Nice. So if we use the Socratic method, we'll kind of end up going in circles over and over and over again, not being able to find a definition of art that satisfies the greater picture of everybody. So for the purpose of today's episode, lecture, class, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to say we should look at the definition of art as art being a tangible medium, and when I say tangible, I mean something that appeals to any of the five senses, that both reflects the natural world, reflects the emotional world, and elicits an emotional response. So in order for it to be a form of art, it must do that. But we're also going to qualify that by saying that the emotional response isn't going to be ubiquitous. It's not going to be the same thing across the board. It's non-homogeneous. Oh, darn. Oh, really? Oh, well, I deserve that. So we're gonna go with that. The emotional response elicit from art is non-homogeneous, and by that I mean what I feel when I look at a piece of art is not the same as what somebody else does, or when I listen to music. When I listen to a Taylor Swift song, I get filled with primarily anger and frustration because I don't understand the appeal. But there are literally billions of tiny ears who swear by T Swift as the greatest vocalist of all time. Darn it. So using that definition, we're gonna address art, video games as art. Oh, I'm gonna die here. And I'm gonna make the argument that video games have maybe always been art, but have shifted from third party, not third party, but like exterior recognition as an art form on the fringe. And by that I mean the people who play and enjoy these games, like yourself and myself, and I assume yourself is included there purely because you're listening to a dorky philosophy major talk about philosophy and video games on a website dedicated to video games. So I'm going to assume that you enjoy them, and as such, can kind of see the art in them. So using the definition we have, which is a tangible something that elicits an emotional response and reflects reality, and the emotional response is non-homogeneous. We have to ask if that fulfills. If video games individually fulfill that mantra, and certainly if we go on a case-by-case basis, there are absolutely some video games that do. I don't think we need to look any further than maybe Hellblade, Senua's Descent, Hellblade, to establish that art very clearly exists, or so that video games are very clearly art. Okay, well, that's defeat. There you go. That's Sheldon's PvP chops at its finest. As I'm sure if you've been watching the series, you've seen me play some Destiny 2 and be real bad at it. So if we look at video games on a case-by-case basis, certainly there are some video games that even the most hardened and steadfast person can't argue against them being art or some fashion. But there are also some games that people look at or play and they kind of go, "This is very clearly kitsch." And there is a point in time where kitsch was not considered to be art, and I think most people would speculate that kitsch is in fact a form of art, at least this day and age. We don't think about people like Andy Warhol and say he wasn't an artist. We look at Andy Warhol and go, that guy was clearly an artist. And when we reflect on him, we don't go, I don't know. We go, yeah, Andy Warhol was an artist. He was maybe one of the greatest artists of his generation, of his time. But we don't want to make a case-by-case basis. I don't want to play Call of Duty and say, this is art. I want to look at the video game genre itself as a whole and say, all video games are art, and that's the argument we're trying to make tonight. Or today, or this morning, whenever you listen to this episode. I guess, spoiler alert, I'm recording this at night. Oh, neat. I get the GPMG. But yeah, so video games certainly are tangible. So we know that video games have some kind of tangibility to them. In this day and age, you know, they at least prompt two of the senses. I guess three of the senses. With the advent of vibration controllers, there's access to touch, sound, and sight. And I mean, the Joy-Con controllers from Nintendo are probably the perfect example of that. The Joy-Con controllers not only are they capable of vibrating, but they're capable of vibrating specific segments, and they can demonstrate specific things like rolling balls in a box. And Nintendo showed that with the 1-2 Switch game.
Team
Here
deathmatch.
we go. This match should be a little bit better, and this match will also bring us to the end of the episode, which is nice. Should wrap up real nicely there. So we know that video games very clearly are tangible. So they meet the first qualification. And I suppose the next one is do video games in general elicit an emotional response? And I'm gonna die here. Oh, never mind. I would argue that all video games elicit some form of emotional response, right? I think that's a fair statement to make. The intensity of the emotional response is going to be dependent on both the person and the game we're playing. I mean, we could look no further than the kids who play Call of Duty, as I am right now, and have gigantic meltdowns when they die, or they get like real sassy with their attitude. You know, when they get a bunch of kills. Nah, okay, fair enough. Scholarly Gamer definitely has some fun stories, because he likes to engage with trolls far more than I do. But like, when you're dealing with somebody in this kind of setting anyways, the emotional reaction is, there's this sense of failure. There's an emotional response in that regard, right? When you die, or you feel like a party has been stripped away. Especially if you've had like 4 or 5 kills, where there's this sense of pride, you know, you're trying to build up that kill streak for your UAV. Hey, buddy. I guess not. No, they're not UAVs in this game, they're just recon. But like, you're trying to build up for recon, or a mortar strike or something like that. Maybe you want to get Molotov cocktails. Whoa, hello. But there's that clear emotional response. And I mean, I don't think anybody could argue that Call of Duty definitely does not, like, anybody who says Call of Duty doesn't reflect reality is clearly out to lunch. So we're gonna keep leaning on Call of Duty here, but we could extend that to any game, for sure, because Call of Duty has an emotional response to it, and that's that. But like, we're playing games like Katamari or Paper Mario. I was gonna say Paper Mario and Mario Party. I'll leave those out because Mario Party is a competitive game, so there's definitely an emotional response there. But if we're looking at games like Katamari, is incredibly surreal and kitschy, but it's also amazingly amusing to watch. And like, when you watch that game, or you're playing it, there's this undeniable sense of joy and almost and freedom while you're playing it, because it's such a positive and energetic game. And if that's that's gonna explode. Run away from the exploding car, and then still die.
Enemy
So
recon aircraft observed.
I think the argument, and we're gonna evaluate this in more detail for sure. This is definitely like a 2 or 3 episoder. We'll look more at video games in the art world, and their place, and maybe try to figure out at what point they made the they made the transition from just from a commodity to a form of art, or if there is a difference, and in fact all art is commodities, because that's an argument you could make as well if you wanted to. It's a crazy argument, and I'm sure there are a lot of artists who, after hearing that, are cringing, and I apologize in advance, but I'm all for having, you know, opinions that, if nothing else, at least push the boundaries of thought, because it's only when we're uncomfortable that we begin to grow, right? Like, when you look at lobsters, they only change their shell after their current shells become too uncomfortable for them to thrive in. Oh darn it. I caught him a couple times, that's fine. Back to, I digress there clearly. So video games have this, very clearly have an emotional response. Ooh, that was fun. Darn it. And we're moving on to the reflection of reality, and maybe actually it would be worthwhile to play Katamari in one of these episodes that we can discuss its impact on the art world, as well as the video game community in the art world. But Call of Duty certainly has that reflection of reality, especially in this regard, because we're playing, you know, a game that takes place in quote-unquote real world. This is Call of Duty World War II, so it's supposed to be maybe not a mirror reflection, but a fairly exact reflection of the trying and difficult times of mid-19th century, like, global economic situations, right? You know, and obviously they romanticize the shit out of a lot of things. Like, in this particular game, almost every fight you're in, you're playing as, or you're always led by an American, and you're always fighting a German. And we all know that that isn't completely accurate with life. when we look at the history of the Second World War, America's involvement came late, and only after their involvement became non-optional because of what's happening in the world. And you're dead. So obviously it's not a true reflection, but it does mirror image parts of reality, and in a very real sense. You know, as we're dealing with not just the real world, but we're dealing with real historic events. I think that's important to note. And we talked about the fact that it elicits an emotional response, and the emotional response is not homogeneous, right? But when I play this game, I get frustrated, I get a little excited, but my emotional reaction, ooh, I got cooked. I think the guy told me to not get cooked, and then I did just that. The emotional response elicit in this game for me is far different from the person who plays this game either competitively or to relieve stress, right? Like, I'm pretty I'm fairly laid back about it. Eyes bloated. I don't like losing. I'm a competitive person, but I don't get too salty over it. So that's gonna wrap up today's episode. It's a little rambly because we're trying to look at art. We're gonna take another look at the definitions for art because we're definitely not done. But we've got an idea as to what art could be and what art should be, or at least for the sake of our arguments. And I'd love your feedback on that one, and maybe some people could posit different definitions of art that we could discuss at length, because that'd be a lot of fun. So thanks so much for tuning in today, everybody. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope you learned a little bit maybe about video games in the art world, or there, and we'll talk a little bit more about the philosophy of aesthetics as well, because there's something to be said about when a video game is visually appealing that makes a big difference for a lot of people. But that's for another episode. Don't forget to check out the Scholarly Gamers website, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter, and I hope to hang out with everybody on the next episode. Bye for now.